to you about not a nation state that is rogue, but a theocratic proto-empire that is very, very rogue. And that is the Islamic State as run by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi out of Iraq and Syria today. Back in June of last year, I wrote an article for Breitbart.com in which I discussed the 4 metrics which made ISIS, the then ISIS, significantly more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. And I'll just quickly go through those and then give you some of the points that CPAC has asked me to summarize on a couple of slides. The first thing that makes ISIS, or the Islamic State, special is that it is a true insurgency. It is not just a terrorist group. I don't want to get into the technicalities, but to suffice it to say, the difference between an insurgency and a terrorist group is that every terrorist group wants to be an insurgency when it grows up. Al-Qaeda was never really an insurgency, not in Afghanistan, not in Somalia. It was always a parasitic organization that attached itself to local insurgencies such as the Taliban and Al-Shabaab. ISIS is different. ISIS now holds territory in excess of the landmass of Great Britain. That means that it is not just a terrorist group with training camps, it is a proto-state. Secondly, it is, and this is all unclassified open source, the richest threat group in modern history. After the second raid on the Iraqi National Bank, the Islamic State, ISIS, walked away with $823 million. If you look at the 9/11 Commission report, you will see that the 9/11 attack, from flight school training to safe houses to student visas, the whole attack cost Al-Qaeda $500,000. That means that ISIS has enough money just from those 2 raids for 1,600 9/11s, should it wish to turn its guns against us. And that is without the $3 million it makes per day in illicit oil sales. Thirdly, it is the most successful jihadist terrorist group in terms of recruitment. Again, unclassified. To quote General Cleveland of USASOC, who my wife and I have done several projects for, the recruiting power of ISIS is staggering, to quote the general. They have recruited 19,000 foreign fighters in less than a year. And that means not Middle Eastern, not Iraqis, not Syrians, Brits, Australians, Americans, and Germans. Those are the kind of recruiting figures Al-Qaeda dreamt of but never achieved. ISIS has made it a reality. And lastly, it really understands social media in ways that Al-Qaeda never did. Its videos, which I recommend to everybody, and I have debated this live on BBC, every taxpayer and every lover of democracy should watch their videos in their entirety, not the censored, politically correct versions, but when you see another human being take 7 minutes to sever another man's head because he's a Christian, then you understand the nature of the war we are in. And let me just stay on the issue of Christians. Not too long ago, every home in Mosul where Christians lived was marked on a Friday afternoon with the letter Nun, or N in Arabic, to denote that the followers of the Nazarene lived in that building. And the occupants were given until 12 o'clock the next day to convert to Islam, or they would be killed. These are Christian communities that in some cases have been there for 1,800 years. Some of the oldest Christian communities in the world. There are no Christians left in Mosul. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, there were 1,400,000 Christians in Iraq. 1,400,000. There are now less than 200,000 left. That is a genocide against Christians on our watch. We need to understand this war as an ideological war, not just a physical war. We are in a war against a global jihadist movement. I think that is the best label, a global jihadist movement, because that includes ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front, and even Boko Haram. The commonality between all of these organizations is they believe in caliphate, and ISIS has established a caliphate for the first time since 1924. So, my takeaways. The global jihadist movement is a generational threat. It will take generations, my children and probably my grandchildren, to win this war. And it is a threat to all freedom-loving people. It cannot be won without US leadership. I'm not calling for the deployment of the 82nd Airborne, but by themselves, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, or the Kurds are not going to be able to deal with this threat. We must be part of the solution, and in fact, at the front of the solution, not leading from behind, whatever that means. This is an ideological war, just like the Cold War, but even more dangerous than the Cold War. Why? Because deterrence doesn't work against an enemy who thinks he's going to heaven if he dies trying to kill you. So this is like the Cold War on steroids. And lastly, just for us to appreciate the enormity of the situation, we have the testimony from the new director of the FBI that now in America there are ongoing ISIS investigations in 49 states, all except Sarah Palin's Alaska. As a result, this is not about the Middle East. So what can you do? I've been asked to tell you what you can do. Educate yourself on the ideas that motivate our enemy. It is appalling that 14 years into this war, this nation still does not adequately understand why Christians, Yazidis, and even Muslims who are not Muslim enough are being killed in the Middle East. Second, educate your family and your friends that this is a war, that this is about protecting America and her values and the Constitution. Be clear to everyone you meet that isolation and non-intervention will not stop a 9/11 ISIS attack. Isolation and non-intervention did not work in 1941 against the fascists and Tojo's Japan. It did not work in 2001 against Al-Qaeda. Educate yourself. I recommend this work that my wife's organization published, Fighting the Ideological War. If you're interested in the kind of work we do for the military and for law enforcement, you can have a look at threatknowledge.org. So that's Fighting the Ideological War, that's available online. And then threatknowledge.org. And then lastly, if you really want to get to grips with this, if you want the grad school level understanding, then you can look at my website, the Gorka briefing, which went online today, my wife's organization, the Council on Global Security, that tracks the growth of the jihadi ideology, not just in the Middle East, but also in Africa and elsewhere. And of course, I have an incredible team, some of who are in this room, that support me at Breitbart, and we monitor this stuff and we write about it every day at Breitbart.com on the National Security Vertical. Thank you. Please help me protect this nation.